Now, joining us is Mohammed Ezzaldeen, the managing editor of Ahram newspaper. Thank you very much for being here with us on In Focus. So, many are calling this France's moral reawakening. Is it being received well across the Arab world?
Thank you so much for having me on Qnews. Certainly, this move was a very positive one, and it means that the international efforts are now heading towards recognizing the Palestinian right and recognizing the Palestinian state. There can be an opinion related to a differentiating between the current situation in Gaza and the war machine and the starvation taking place there and the political path, re- recognizing the Palestinian state. Also, at an international level, there are 2 points. First, the right to establish a Palestinian state or a two-state solution on which most European states agree, but the direct recognition of a Palestinian state, I think, might require more momentum and consensus from the European states in particular. For the Arab world, it's a very strong move from France, and definitely Macron is seeking to have a bigger role in the European Union during the upcoming period, as he's taking real stances in some issues connecting the European Union to the world and to the region.
Now, critics, of course, in the United States, Marco Rubio being one of them, the Secretary of State, and also in Israel, they're shouting Hamas propaganda. Is this just a desperate attempt to preserve the status quo? I mean, it was kind of expected that they would react this way, of course.
First of all, the occupying state, Israel, is seeing this move as a hostile move, as it opens the door for further recognition by the rest of the world of the Palestinian state. France is one of the major powers, and therefore its recognition of a Palestinian state, if it actually happens in the United Nations General Assembly meeting, will have a great impact on the rest of the world. For the United States, it is the strategic partner and ally to Israel in all matters, and they conceive this as a breach of what they can call the privacy of dealing with Israel or the military or political situation of Israel. And therefore, the United States response is not surprising, it's perfectly normal and comes in the framework of how they handle such positions completely biased to Israel. At an international level, it's completely different. As I have stated earlier, there is growing dissent towards the war in Gaza and killing civilians, in addition to the starvation war being launched at the moment. I think this will reflect significantly in bringing the Palestinian cause once more to the attention.
Now, if you look at France itself, the left in France is celebrating this decision by Macron. The far right, is outraged. That just goes to show how different left and right are these days in European politics. But do you think this decision will strengthen Macron and his legacy? Do you think he will be remembered for this decision?
Whether this move is presented or not, it's a very strong move from a very professional politician. President Macron is taking politics to the next level, and therefore this move adds a lot to the French foreign policy. It also adds to Macron's international relations, especially with the Arab world and with the GCC and Middle East states. France has a lot of trade and economic transactions with this region, and they aspire for more. And this stance can be perceived by French politicians as in the direct interest of the French state. But the far right in Europe or even in France, they have particular opinions and they do not like to intervene in this manner in others' affairs. But there has been criticism not only to the Palestinian cause, but it can be criticism by the opposition to the character of President Macron himself. It's here about interest and the leadership or approaching the leadership of the European Union after the BRICS and the UK leaving the European Union, which completely supports the French economy and supports the French relations with the Arab world.
Well, let's look at those big European countries then. You mentioned the UK, although not part of the EU, one of the three big European nations, Germany being the other one, and they seem very, very unlikely to follow France down this path and recognize Palestine as a state as it stands. Why do you think that is?
Palestine formally in the United Nations and believing in the two-state solution, that to have two states, the occupying state in addition to the Palestinian state, with the PA ruling this government, the recognition might have a political nature, so it's not that important to compare to have a political path towards a two-state solution, meaning that this requires more momentum, more efforts by the European states to acknowledge if the peace path in the future will be the same as the one proposed now, instead of war and starvation policy and killing the Palestinians. It's here about the political European will, and I wouldn't rule out to have new European states following in the footsteps of France after President Macron acknowledges the Palestinian state as an independent state.
Now, Macron, of course, has shifted from some like vague statements that he used to make to now decisive action. Has pressure from countries in the Arab world been applied to help him make this decision?
I think the larger scale pressures from international organizations and the massacres being committed against Palestinians, in addition to the war of starvations and using the humanitarian aid as a weapon, also the internal pressures from the European states to stop the hostilities launched by the occupying forces against the Palestinian population. I think all of that play a very big role, in addition also to the political aspiration of President Macron to establish a pioneering position for France in the European Union, and also for France to play a bigger role in the world global politics, especially that the new European leadership is trying to have a say in most of the Middle East issues, the Iran-Israel war and the roles being played now by the United States. France, here represented in Macron, aspire to have a bigger role for France related to the region, in addition to preserving the humanitarian, political, and economic ties with the Arab world, especially the GCC country and Egypt.
And the Americans and the Israelis are arguing that France's decision to recognize a Palestinian state is going to make peace harder. How does that even make sense?
I think this can be added to the statements of President Donald Trump that are not very welcomed for the international community. It cannot be described with anything if we even give it a room to be commented upon. Of course, the US administration supports Israel directly and is completely biased to Israel. So any fair move or just move for the international community is a negative move for the United States if it contradicts with the Israeli interest. It's blind support for Israel and way away from reality.
Now, of course, Israel has been flouting international law whenever it feels like. Does this move by France kind of, in some perhaps small way, reignite hope that international law might one day be back on the agenda?
Of course, I think that the efforts exerted by Egypt and Qatar as mediators in this cause, in addition to the international organizations and the United Nations, as well as the international community in general, is a victory for human justice, and especially that the occupying state has always broken all international charters and treaties. They have committed the most massacres in modern history against unarmed Palestinians, and therefore any international stance by heads of states or from international bodies and organizations can be unobstructed by the US veto or others is a victory for humanity and a return to rebalance justice once again.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the program, Mohammed Ezzeldin, who is the managing editor of Ahram newspaper. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News on our program.